President Biden doubling down yesterday as he addressed the nation about the final withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, saying if he had done things differently, it still would have been a dangerous mission. Take a look.
There still would have been a rush to the airport, a breakdown in confidence and control of the government, and it still would have been a very difficult and dangerous mission.
All right, that is retired Lieutenant Colonel Alan West joining us live here to talk about this. Many words from the president yesterday on the withdrawal and the ending of the war there. I just am curious to get your thoughts. It seems as though the president has a crystal ball in the back and knows exactly how things would have how the outcome would have changed if he would have done it any differently. Some say otherwise. Some say that if you handled things differently, if you kept Bagram open, if you had condition-based agreements, it didn't have to end with 13 lives lost. It didn't have to end with all this equipment left in the hands of the Taliban, and on and on and on. Colonel, your thoughts?
Well, it's good to be with you, Sean. And I think one of the things that happens in military planning 101, you always look at the most dangerous course of action that could come about, not the most likely. And if you really were serious about planning with a withdrawal from Afghanistan, you would have had a phased approach, and you would have made sure that you kept control and kept those airfields that we were able to control open, such as Bagram, such as Kandahar Airfield, where I spent 2.5 years, also in Herat and also in Mazar Sharif. You would have had regional air bases where you could have had people come to, instead of trying to believe that driving to Kabul airport is like me driving from here down to San Antonio. That is not the case. So when Joe Biden talks about how this was an extraordinary success, this was an extraordinary blunder. The Berlin airlift was an extraordinary success. But when you look at $85 billion of U.S. military equipment, then now the Taliban is one of the most well-equipped armies in the world. You look at 13 Americans who lost their lives, another 18 fighting for their lives due to their injuries. You look at the suicide bombing. You look at all of the things that could have been avoided. This was an incredible failure, and there are a lot of people that should be resigning their positions and their office, starting with Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about, resignations. It seems as if this administration doesn't believe in resignations, doesn't believe in holding anyone accountable, and anything that is done in this administration is spun as a success. No matter what side of the aisle you're on and which administration you support, which one you don't, that's not true with anyone, because we're all human at the end of the day. Every one of us makes mistakes, and when you do, I could bring up the Jeopardy host, the executive producer of Jeopardy, literally lost his job because he said something bad on a podcast, and now he can't host the program anymore. You've got 13 service members' lives lost. I'm pretty sure that accounts for a resignation of some sort. NSA, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, but yet no heads have rolled for this. Why?
Well, because Washington, D.C. is the city of no accountability. And it's just amazing to me that when you have these dire consequences that result in the loss of life, no one in their right mind would put U.S. military forces in a bowl, in an untenable position, in an airfield which you cannot defend, especially when you had all of those different airfields and air bases that you could have defended. So who was responsible for going along with that decision? And I look at people such as General Austin, the Secretary of Defense, and the uniformed members such as General Milley. They should step down and resign if they made those recommendations, and then Joe Biden says that he doesn't want to do it. And let me clarify something else. Joe Biden did not end the war in Afghanistan. Joe Biden lost the war in Afghanistan. And really, to say that it's a war in Afghanistan is a misnomer. We're fighting against Islamic jihadism and Islamic fundamentalism. And what we have done was just embolden them and given them an even greater base of operations from which they can launch any more attacks. And we have gone right back to square one where we were 20 years ago.
I want to go to a more personal note about what we've seen with the withdrawal. One of the Gold Star dads who refused to meet with the president had this to say about that mission when he spoke with former Navy SEAL and Newsmax host Carl Higbie. Here's that.
He's the one that sent them in there and abandoned them. And that sentiment is echoed by several of his teammates from all three of his separate units that he was in, that basically they were abandoned.
They were abandoned. That's from a Gold Star father. And it's sad to see his story and to hear him tell it. But he's upset, doesn't want to meet with the President of the United States. What are your thoughts on that? Should there be an investigation how this went so wrong?
It should be a huge investigation, but of course the progressive socialist left, the Democrat Party, will not allow that to happen. If you can just imagine if this was Donald Trump sitting in the White House right now and this debacle had occurred, what would be on the front page of every paper? What would Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and everyone be saying? You know, you think about the voices of the quote unquote the squad. Where are their voices with the women of Afghanistan and what they're going to have to endure? So no one is taking responsibility and accountability. And for Joe Biden to come out yesterday and try to be belligerent and obtuse and yelling and screaming and shouting at the American people, that just shows that he realizes that he failed, but he's trying to bluster us into submission. We've got to get to the bottom of this, and a lot of people need to be not in positions of elected power in the United States of America. This is going to have long-term ramifications for us when you look at dealing with China, when you look at dealing with Russia, when you look at dealing with Iran. We are not in a good position as far as our foreign policy, national security posture as the United States of America.
And President Biden confirming 100 to 200 Americans are still left behind, some that do want to come home. Many find that unacceptable. Many find one life still there remaining unacceptable in Afghanistan that want to come home. We have been told that we have a diplomatic advantage over the Taliban and the possibility of providing economic assistance. That sounds like hostage negotiations to me, sir.
No, you're absolutely right. And let's just go back to 1979 and remember that when Jimmy Carter made the fateful decision not supporting the Shah of Iran, and Iran collapsed, you had the Islamic Revolution, and the Ayatollah Khomeini came into power, and we had 52 Americans that were held hostage for 444 days. We have a hostage situation, and we have no leverage over the Taliban. The Taliban has effectively, thanks to Joe Biden, enacted a coup, taken over the country of Afghanistan. They're going to rule it under Sharia law. They've already said that. They are going to establish the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, a caliphate, if you want to call it that. And so those Americans that are there are going to be forced to be living under Sharia law or else. And the or else is you pay us, or what is the result? So I think that we have the options on the ground, that we need to look at how we can use secure communications systems. We need to look at getting those people to a place where we can extract them out so that they do not have to be under the thumb and be held hostage by the Taliban. The clock is ticking right now. The Taliban is looking for those Americans to get them firmly under their control, and we need to make sure that we do not allow that situation to happen.
Absolutely. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West joining us live here on the program. Colonel, good to see you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Sean. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.